Chattanooga, Tennessee, David Tulis.
You know, when you say you're a dissenter, you give the impression that somehow you're saying no. You're saying things that are negative. You are downcast. You are angry. You're bitter. A dissenter is someone who it may be in the gulag. He may be in a very gray uniform or an orange jumpsuit, perhaps, right, as an inmate. He may be someone whose hair is not combed, who doesn't shave, who's just bitter and angry because he's in jail, because he said no to something, and he clearly was wrong. He was judged to be wrong, and the judge put him in the jail for being a dissenter, ignoring some righteous law or other. A dissenter, though, isn't necessarily someone who's just saying no. He's also affirming other things, right? He is saying no to one thing, but affirming and holding up the alternative view, right? The alternative vision, a vision that in his mind is favors more people, is right for more people, maybe helps the poor, maybe establishes equity in the land, maybe a view that beholds justice as coming from courts, an end of abuse of commoners, an end of thievery by the elites, right? These are the things that are positive that the dissenter holds forth. In my case, as dissenter, I'm not just someone who says no, but I think you have to start with saying no. And the ideals of free markets and local economy that we espouse here at Nooga Radio are tremendously positive, right? I have probably more than any writer in Chattanooga a positive view of the future. It's highly, highly positive, extraordinarily optimistic. And even in Christendom, among Christian people, my view is very, very positive for God's glory and for the benefit of mankind. And that is that there will be more grace as time goes on, more grace in the economy, more grace in law, more lenity and justice among people who are different, who are maybe in dispute or having arguments. There will be less violence, right? There'll be less war. And that is the progress of humanity. As we're thinking, can you tell the story of mankind in 6 words? I asked that of a gospel minister recently. He tried it in 6 or 7. He gave me about 15, and then wanted to elaborate, and then we had another 30 words or so to give his summary of the Bible, right? The Bible, which tells the story of mankind. My analysis, very optimistic, is something like this. I'm not going to count the words here because being a journalist, I don't do numbers, right? But I would say the story of mankind in the root, right, at the racine, as the French would say, down to the very roots of the human condition, is a transition from wrath to grace. That is the story of mankind. And look at the pivotal point in that whole story. You can understand why I'm so optimistic, because prior to the resurrection, only one tiny group of people had God's favor. Prior to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus a couple thousand years ago, all mankind was damned, except for one narrow strand of people that had God's favor for centuries, until finally God shed his grace in a more broader fashion, right? That's called the New Covenant. The Old Covenant was restricted to Israelites and those who attached themselves to the nation of Israel, to the Confederation first, and then the Kingdom of Israel later. Apart from God's showing favor to that people, he showed favor to none other. And so kingdoms around the world, the Chinese, the Africans, all consigned to hell because God had not shown them his grace, those peoples his grace. But now, with the resurrection, the promise of grace is extended from that narrow group, from the Israelites, to the world at large. And so that's why the resurrection is so pivotal. Even secular historians recognize that. And there has been an improvement in the condition of man and the saving of souls, and millions of souls worldwide. And there's a promise of even greater conversion of nations, such as Samoa, just recently elected to alter its constitution to make it a Christian nation in the Pacific Ocean. That is progress. And what we have is greater grace. Now, grace is putting the other person first, right? The argument for abortion, the argument for the killing of boys and girls, those that we know the first are black girls and black boys. They are the most, per capita, they are the most decapitated group of people. Because the abortion trade favors and from Margaret Sanger's racism, she was a eugenicist. She was an anti-black racist. She did not like black people, and the more black people we get rid of, the better the world is going to be. Right? We cannot have these sort of inveterate people, invertebrate people populating the United States. That theory says for the argument for patronizing Planned Parenthood is first me and then you, right? The gospel turns that around. It's first thee and then me, right? Your way first and then my way. Your life for mine. It's not your life for mine is what Planned Parenthood says. The gospel says my life for yours. And so in Christianity, there's the idea of self-sacrifice, thinking of the other first. And as we explain here, David Tulis, thanks for joining us. As we explain here, capitalism is based on grace. It is based on the gospel. And if you obey the gospel in your business, whether you're a believer or not, is beside the point. If you follow the gospel principles of the other first, your business will succeed. Every entrepreneur has done that. Whether the man who founded Virgin Records, Virgin Airlines, Virgin Space, or others, they're giving people what they want at a lower price. That is entrepreneurship, and that's always favoring your customers, right? Whether he started Branson started his business selling records, cheap records at college, right? He got records cut cheap, and he sold them at discount and had a huge business from the dorm. And he had many experiences like that. Thinking of other people, giving them an advantage. The marketplace is that. In man's progress through time, there is going to be more grace, more marketplace, less oppression, less control of the marketplace, less cartelism, right? We live in an age of the cartel, the age of the license. The state license, by definition, is discriminatory. It discriminates always against the people who don't have the money to buy it. Whether it's a gun license or a driver license, those people who exercise their constitutional rights and do these things apart from licensure, they are subject to enforcement action. It is, of course, ungodly, as commercial government always is. Commercial government that we have today favors those with permission, right? Those who can afford to pay. And yet we have thousands of people in Chattanooga who are licensees who have expired licenses, suspended licenses, or what have you, and face criminal interruption of their days by the cops who are commercial enforcers. The cops enforce commercial government routinely, even as against people who are exercising a liberty to travel or a liberty to move about. They are the objects of criminal enforcement in commercial, for a commercial business, which is the state of Tennessee. Now, the move against Airbnb in the city council yesterday is part of that larger picture. And it is against this prohibition against large parts of the city and people in the city that we complain, that you, my listener, complain. You're not going to find out about this from any other platform than mine here, David Tulis, the blogger with the biggest pen, live on Facebook at Nooga Radio, and also live on YouTube at Hot News Talk Radio. We are live, and my show is live every day, so you can watch me on your phone. Do get the TuneIn Radio app and make Nooga Radio your default radio station. Traveling far, traveling near, you can hear Sean Hannity, starts at 3, Colin Cowherd at noon. We have Alex Jones, the wild businessman who's looks at conspiracy, doubts the Sandy Hook narrative, doubts the 9/11 narrative, as I do, and a very, very lively host. Only here. At Nooga Radio. Also here only NASCAR on Sunday, NCAA, NFL. We are a terrific multimedia platform, and I'm David Tulis, the blogger with the biggest pen. The website is Nooganomics.com, Nooganomics.com. You're not going to find in the dreary media of Chattanooga any analysis or any reporting quite like that found there. Please do subscribe. Have my post instantly with a link in your inbox. See what we have to say. The news today is about, of course, Airbnb, and I stayed up way past my bedtime to get that story out, giving the true analysis of what happened, right? The deep, looking at things as in the deep state. We talk about the deep state in Washington and New York and Baltimore and Chicago, but it is also operating here in Chattanooga. I met yesterday the city council member, Anthony Byrd. He voted for the ordinance, and his position, I think, if he were going to explain it, would probably be very traditional, very conventional. But what I find remarkable about Anthony Byrd is that as a black man, he has suffered through the same sorts of abuse that Hanson Melvin has. And Anthony Byrd, as a city council member who will be passing in a vote with that body on the nominee for chief of police, there is, I would say, a glimmer of hope that we might be getting in Chattanooga in the replacement for Fred Fletcher, a reformist candidate, a police reform candidate or applicant for the job of police chief. Now, Anthony Byrd gave up a job he had in Sessions Court as a court officer. He had for several years. He's a younger man in his 40s, has some connection with the radio business, and has, for now, his main gig is the city council. Of course, that is poverty wages. You can't really make a living being a city council member. But we talked about policing and police abuse. I mentioned Hanson Melvin case. Hanson is suing the city, making very modest demands for compensation, only $500,000. His case is brought by the city's best attorney, Clay Whitaker. Clay Whitaker, by the way, at McCoon Law. I asked Anthony Byrd, how many times have you been stopped by police, being a black man? He said 30, 40, 50. And then we went on in the conversation. I went back, well, come on, Anthony, tell me how many times you've been stopped by police just being who you are. And he put the number between 30 and 40. And that was maybe a kind of a casual guess, and maybe he's not really thought about it. But for me, that's an important figure. We have police abuse in Chattanooga, and that matter of abuse is brought out, is highlighted by the complaint in circuit court filed by Hanson Melvin, who's also, as it turns out, he's a black man. The fact that he's black is not the key issue, of course. It is, as I highlight these abuses and the need for reform, I do say this is the walking while black case of Chattanooga. At least Hanson wasn't shot dead, but crimes were committed against him. A list of crimes that the prosecutor, the state prosecutor for Hamilton County, Neil Pinkston, has ignored. He has ignored these crimes. There were many of them. When in my reporting on this, I've pointed out that Neil Pinkston is sanctioning crime by state actors and not prosecuting an open case of criminality in the forces of the police department. And the firing of Officer David Campbell was really for administrative reasons, not for criminal reasons. There was not the charge of criminality in his dismissal by Chief Fletcher just before the election, right? Just before Anthony Burke wrote the digital tidal wave back into office. The firing is for administrative wrongs, not criminal wrongs. And I think Chief Fletcher knows that that's all he has. The only authority he has is administrative and not criminal. Criminal wrongs are alleged by the state itself. But the state is willing to consider and permit the abuse of its peace and tranquility, right, and the peace and tranquility of its people when the violation is enacted and brought about by the officer. Now, the crimes list, just to give you a quick review here. Neil Pinkston has ignored an illegal and unconstitutional search and seizure, assault, and the lawsuit names the Tennessee Code provision: aggravated assault, kidnapping, aggravated kidnapping, official oppression, false imprisonment, official misconduct, perjury, suborning perjury, aggravated perjury, conspiracy, civil rights intimidation, and attempt. That done by David Campbell and John Doe John Doe officers. This custom, the training is so bad and so bleak in Chattanooga that the abuse of Hanson Melvin is customary, right? That's what it is, a well-settled standard operating procedure that the officer defendant and the John Doe next to him used their training to abuse. The custom is well settled and accepted by the city of Chattanooga Police Department. The filing says on page 12, it points out that the training is at fault. The city's training program is inadequate to train its employees to carry out their duties. The failure to train amounted to deliberate indifference to the fact that inaction would obviously result in the violation of the above enumerated rights. Namely, the defendant, David Campbell, and John Doe officers were not trained, among others, to understand probable cause. This is the problem. And at the minimum, the new chief of police, Anthony Byrd, and others should consider, needs to have extreme training in probable cause. What is it? The trigger should be tough, right? These officers act without there being any resistance. They just pull a trigger, bam, they've got an arrest. The trigger needs to be a really hard pull. They're not trained in probable cause. They're not trained in civil rights under the U.S. Constitution, the limitations of authority of an officer, the elements of disorderly conduct. They're not trained in arrest procedure. They're not trained in the rights of free speech of the citizenry, the ethics of law enforcement, anger management, fear management, leadership, use of force, consensual contact, reasonable suspicion, Terry stops, police liability, questioning, Miranda, misconduct, and official policy of the city of Chattanooga. These are the areas of inadequate training. The emphasis needs to be on the 4 points of reform. And Anthony Byrd, I think, will be an ally for you, my listener, in this area. He is new on the city council. His name is Anthony Byrd, a young black man who says he's been stopped 30 or 40 times by police, a man who's not a criminal, right? He's not a criminal. And so there is at least one member who's not so cluttered in his thinking with the routines to understand that he has a veto power and he has a power of influence. And that is something I think the city council should seek to exercise. Influence Mayor Andy Burke, whose charge is the police department, right? The police department is in the executive branch and the chief serves him. And so the council members think, well, there's not much we can do about that. We just have to say yay or nay on those presented to us. And that may be all practically that they have in the way of authority. But there should be a clamor, I suggest, for enhanced training. The 4 points of reform are the use of time, cover, space, and de-escalation. Those are the 4 points. And around the country, in many, many cities, even in cities in rough New Jersey, there are new methods of training, and the officers are trained to have a respect for human life. That's the problem we have in Chattanooga and Hamilton County. There's not that respect for life. There's not a great jealousy for the life of every person. And officers, I think, should not have as their mantra getting home at the end of the shift. That is the mantra in every police department. And what it does, it puts an extreme emphasis on self-preservation. So officers are constantly fearful. That mantra and other parts of their training make them constantly fear for their personal safety. And they're willing to make a mistake. The mistake that they're willing to make is one that takes the life of an innocent person. If a mistake is made and an innocent life is to be had, it should be theirs and not the innocent citizen. So the problem is, how do they view their job sacrificially? Is there any way in which they're willing to die for the innocent in a mistake, clearly a mistake? When there's a shooting, should they be willing to die rather than to take the life of an innocent person by accident? So the question is, if there's an accident, who takes the loss? Is it the citizen? Is it you, or is it the officer? I think these officers enter into this force, enter into training, and enter into public service with the idea of being self-sacrificed. They always talk about the ultimate sacrifice. We're willing to make it, right? But are they really willing to make it? Their training makes them unwilling to take that sacrifice and to push the risk out, not to take the risk, but to push the risk out. And so you're going to have people who are slain like Philando Castile. That was a travesty of justice that officer Jimenez was freed of a criminal account. His misdeeds brought a nearly $3 million settlement upon the family of the Castiles. but still an innocent man was slain. The officer acted according to his training, and there was an accident, and the accident was shed the blood of an innocent man. Better that the shedding of blood be against the officer than against the innocent civilian. That is the paradigm I think we need to consider, and that is the high expectation that we who seek protection from the police should have of them. We should not have it that blood be shed left and right in statutorily permitted extrajudicial summary executions. That's what we have a lot of. We had that in East Ridge in August last year. Officer Stevenson executing Todd Browning, violating all the reform principles. We need to have reform in East Ridge. We need to have reform in Chattanooga of this very important profession. This is David Tulis, seeking more peace and grace in local economy and more free markets.
In-depth traffic, news, and information. Mornings on Nooga Radio, AM 1240.